Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I'm Nick, and this is Super Simple Security Principles, where we talk about digital security principles that are easy to understand no matter your skill level. We are part of the I Hate Passwords Digital Self Defense Academy, or IHP Academy for short.
Okay, welcome back. This is episode 31. Are you safe surfing the web? Dude, we got some good questions ready to go. With us always, our master guardian, Makane. Woo!
Hey Nick, thanks for that introduction.
You betcha, buddy. How you doing today?
Good. Yeah,
Good.
look forward to answer your questions. I know you had another question too about Google.
I do, man. I saw this commercial that kind of freaked me out. Can we start there? Are you okay with this?
Yeah.
And it had these little, like, as you see, like monitoring cameras, that people put on their property. Had people, like, I'm assuming on their phones surfing the web. I'm assuming. I wasn't paying it complete attention at the time. It was a commercial on TV. And it had them being spied on as they were kind of searching the web. And so it said something about browser and whatever. And immediately, like any non-techie person, I was like, oh crap, people are spying on me, and I tuned out. So congratulations, Google, with your new commercial. You've just turned off every non-techie out there. We've all gone, great, Google's spying on us even more now. That's what I came along with. I'm sure that wasn't the intended point, but that's what came across.
Fair enough.
So,
well, and I wouldn't say, that's kind of a big question.
Right, it's a loaded question. Take it for what you want, break it down, and use what's useful, please.
Yeah, well, and a browser extension, if you grant it permission to use your camera, then it could be recording, but it does have to ask and get permission because, for example, just like in StreamYard here right now where we're recording, we had to give the website, not an extension, but we had to give StreamYard permission to use our video.
Right.
And there are extensions that could ask and you would have to give permission to use video. And that's pretty ubiquitous these days. Anything you do, it pretty clear you have to let it. So I don't see any like necessarily unusual or particularly high risk with browser extensions to spy on you video wise.
What about, are they watching what we're doing online?
Right. Well, so that's a bigger question, and yeah, so we will answer that during the course of
so this. We're going to answer this. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pumped. Can we start with the first question though, because I really don't know what a browser extension is. I know what a browser is, but what's an extension?
Right. What I'm glad you mentioned the browser because I figured you probably remember, but I thought for our listener, just to be sure, we'd just quickly review that a browser is just the app that you use when you're browsing or surfing the web. And for most people, what they recognize is Google Chrome because that just has by far the most people using it. Although if you're on an iPhone, the default browser is Safari, which I know a lot of people recognize. And on Windows, Microsoft likes to push you anyway to use their browser, which is Microsoft Edge. So a browser extension is it's like a mini app that can be added to your browser that gives it a new feature or changes something about how it works. And probably the best example I know you will know is an ad blocker.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody likes the ads, and so lots of people now, and there's kind of back and forth trying to prevent ad blockers from working, and that anyway, that's an example of a browser extension. I looked up, some of the most popular ones. Another one is Grammarly, that checks your grammar while you're making posts online or writing emails. There's also like saving the page you're viewing for later. like with Evernote or OneNote Web Clipper.
Ooh.
They can save that and stick that in your Evernote notebook.
Okay.
So those are some big examples of different kinds of things that it can do. And
I've used Grammarly. You mentioned that, and I've used it.
yeah, there's over 100,000 of them on the Google Chrome Web Store. So there's a huge variety of things it can do. And actually, there's a number of pretty useful security ones, which we'll cover more in depth in other episodes. But there is another one that you have, that both you and I have, and that's 1Password.
Yeah.
Right. So we have the 1Password app, but then we have also the 1Password browser extension. There's two separate pieces that we have on our laptops. And the browser extension is the piece of it that lets the 1Password app actually enter your password when you're trying to log into a website instead of you having to type it in. It had to have that extension in there in order to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So the next thing to note, just as far as like what a browser extension is that they're primarily available only for non-mobile devices. So the rest of this episode really is just, it's for desktops and laptops, because the only one that you're really going to see normally is the Apple App Store has a dedicated section for Safari extensions that will work on your iPhone. But any other browser, any other like Android and stuff, they're just not really there unless you're like really looking for them. They're not well supported, and it's just not the main target. So
Okay, so most of this is for your laptop user, which, by the way, there are a ton of laptop users. So, and desktop. Sorry, not to eliminate the desktop. I only use laptop, but yeah. So,
yeah, there's still a lot. Right.
Excellent.
So the next question is,
obviously, I was going to say, do I need them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's no I don't really have like an exact answer to that. You'll kind of see by the end, but it's really like I do use a few. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, depends on the person, right?
Absolutely. Very much depends on your needs.
Because I use one. And I would recommend at least using one personally. The one that I'm thinking of, the 1Password that we talked about.
Exactly.
I've loved having that.
Yeah. And there's a small handful that I use, but it really, it depends on the person. And so part of that will be answered by like, which ones can you trust, right? Because you want to make sure they're ones you can trust.
Right. I mean, you're essentially giving them a little bit of permission to see what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're not quite there yet, but that's, yeah.
Well, my bad. Spoiler alert.
No. Well, that really leads into the next question, right? Is what bad things can they do?
Right.
Right. And we've kind of danced around that, and the short answer is a lot. Okay. Because you're installing essentially new software. It's a tiny piece of new software, but it is new software that you're putting on your computer. And anytime you're putting new software on your computer, there's risk.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying don't install things. I mean, obviously, you've got to install lots of things to do anything on your computer. But the point of mentioning that is to differentiate, for example, between clicking on a link and installing something. Because we've talked a lot about clicking on links, and that's something we hear a lot about these days. There's risk there, right?
Right.
Which is good, because there absolutely is. But I want to emphasize that installing something is generally more risky even than clicking a link. So I just want people to exercise as much caution when installing something, including a browser extension, as they do when clicking a link.
I want you to reiterate that, because that stood out to me. There's more risk?
Yeah, I would, there's parameters, but overall, if I were going to simplify it, Yes.
Wow.
Because normally clicking on a link is the first step into leading you to installing some new software, because that's where then they
Right.
can really do damage. And so if you click
Right.
on it and you go to a bad website, there's usually, not always, there can be special cases where that in itself can something really bad can happen, but it's very, very rare.
So
Whereas in
basically
yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
No, you're
Brother.
fine.
So
Nope.
basically by us adding this extension, we're realistically skipping those preliminary steps and we're going straight to download, basically.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is why they could do some bad things, right?
Yeah. Well, and here's another aspect, right? Okay, so riskier than clicking on a link. I would also categorize them as more risky on average, again, than installing an app,
Whoa.
right? And
Okay.
there's a few reasons why that is. The main two is, first, the Google Chrome Web Store, which is the primary source for browser extensions, has historically allowed much more malicious, a higher quantity of malicious extensions in it than the main app stores have.
Yikes.
Yeah. And uh, then the second reason is because of how granular the permissions are. And here's what I mean. I'll just give you an
Right.
example. One of the most common permissions that a browser extension asks for, you get these pop-ups of, can this app do this? Can this browser extension do this, right?
Right.
Well, for most extensions, or maybe not most, but a lot of extensions, almost all the ones that I personally use, the permissions that you have to give it essentially read and change all your data on all websites you visit.
Wow.
Right. And that's as bad as it sounds, okay? Because specifically what that means is, if a browser extension has that permission, that means, yes, they could steal any website username and password that you have.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Now, yeah, and it's kind of an unfortunate side effect from the way web technology has evolved, that we don't have more specific permissions than just all data on all websites. And it's just not a problem that we've really solved yet. And that's the most common example. But depending on the permissions you give it, like there's the camera that you talked about, and there's a whole range of other permissions that you could end up giving it. So that's why one of the reasons we talk about permissions a lot is, like, you got to pay attention when things are popping up asking for permissions. You need to read what it's asking.
Yeah,
Right?
I've been guilty of not reading before.
Yeah, well, we all have. But, and this is one we will talk about more. I'm probably gonna do a full episode on this one, but once trustworthy extension can become not trustworthy, and without a lot of fanfare, without it being obvious. And there's a whole
Really?
lot of there's a lot of interesting story around that. But the main takeaway for today is, it's one more reason to be careful of extensions. We don't have time to go into it, because there's some really good stories related to that I want to have time to share when we do that episode.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do that episode because I'm curious now. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's part of the idea, right? I want people to be interested, to be excited to listen, because it was fascinating, because it's only a story that I came across this year. I knew some of the things, but it was an interesting find for me as I was looking closely into these things. So I want to now get to the question of, the question hopefully our listeners are asking is, how do I know which extensions to trust then? Because this all sounds pretty bad so far, right?
Right. So far, we've been pretty bleak. But there
Yeah.
are browser extensions that we use and we
Yep.
trust. So
Exactly. It's not all bad.
right.
So here's my few guidelines. And the first still is on kind of the bad front, where we want to assume that a browser extension is unsafe until, guilty until proven innocent, right? We want to
Right.
be suspicious and skeptical. And we've talked about this a lot, right? This is a good general rule for online security, but I would say especially so with browser extensions. Okay.
Okay.
But here's one area where you might actually feel safe. So is if a browser extension is only usable in conjunction with a paid service, that's a really good sign. Like 1Password, right? The
Okay.
1Password browser extension, totally useless unless you have a paid 1Password subscription.
Right. Right.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Same with the Evernote web clipper. Or
Yeah.
even Grammarly to an extent. It can be used for free, but it has a paid upgrade option too. And the theme, of course, here is the primary reason that browser extensions, do bad things is because they're trying to, make money in some fashion by stealing your data and monetizing it, whatever, right? Whereas if they're just a means to support some normal revenue model, then they're a lot less likely to be dangerous. Not guaranteed by any stretch, but it's a good sign.
Right. Okay. Again, follow the money. Money talks.
Yep. Exactly. And honestly, that was only the I mean, if it's from somebody else, like from Google, for example,
Yeah.
a big company or things that and trust in whatever ways, at least. Like I trust Google that they're not just straight out trying to. I understand their motivations and the ways they might try to take advantage of me, right?
Right.
So obviously, if it's a brand that is big and well known, that can be another good sign. And unfortunately, that's really all I've got in terms of like general rules of these are ones that you might trust. It just is a matter of researching it. And maybe I'll come up with some more later. I don't know, but that's all I have so far. I will say though, as
Always being a
always,
skeptic. That's a
yeah,
good one. And then follow the money. Money talks. If
yeah,
it's a brand that you recognize, obviously that's a big deal, because
yeah,
but and then do your research. I mean, those are 4 fantastic steps that really will help you solidify if you're going to trust this extension or not, I would imagine. I mean, you listed them
yeah,
to me and I checked them
yeah,
off in my brain with like 1Password. I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah. With 1Password, this is what I did. This is what we went through. Okay, it was something we trust. It was somebody I knew. I did my research into them. I tried them out for a while, knew it was something I wanted." Like, yeah. Dude, that's sound
yeah.
advice. I love it.
Yeah, well, I was just hoping for more of categories of like, yeah, these are ones you can probably trust because I'd like to be able to have more that people can use because there is some good stuff out there. But
Well, maybe we can bring that to them later.
yeah,
Lots of,
exactly.
I love it.
Well, and as always, we'll just add that if there's any questions about like some functionality that you're wanting or there's a specific browser extension that you're looking at, we're always happy to discuss that and research. Look, always love an excuse to, as Nick likes to say, geek out and research some stuff. So
Come ask us on our forum.
exactly. Yep, and that's all I got. I think we answered all our questions, right?
I think we did. I think we did.
Okay. Any other ones come up for you as we were talking?
No, do you know what? A lot of questions were answered. I know what a browser extension is now. Do I need them? In my case, I absolutely do. You know, I'm aware of my risks. I am literally fast forwarding and skipping some steps by adding that browser extension to my laptop specifically in this case. And the good news is I knew who to trust. So absolutely, like, this was a good episode. It rocked. Thanks, Master Guardian.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's give them a little call to action before we
I think we
close out.
should. Let's hear it. What's our call to action today?
If you use a laptop or a desktop computer, open up your browser and review the extensions that you have installed. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. It's not super complex, but just in case, just help you find them. And then uninstall or disable at the very least. If you're like not sure, you can disable it and then re-enable it later in case you decided that you need it. But if you don't know, trust, and want any extension, and you might be surprised at what's in there. And of course, if you have any questions about any of them that you see that you're surprised by, come to the forum and we'll help you.
Sounds
That's
fantastic. That's it. There you go. That's our show. Okay,
Okay.
I love our call to action. Again, there will be links in the show notes, right?
Yep.
All right, let's give it a go.
Okay, that's our super simple show today. If you're not a member of the IHP Academy already, please come join us for free. Stop searching the whole internet for answers and never knowing who to trust. Ask us instead. We made it super simple to find us, and it only takes 2 minutes to sign up. Just visit helpmegetsafe.com. Enter your name and your email. You're in. You can also find the link in our show notes. Thank you for joining us, and make it a great day. Bye-bye.